What's up, nerds? Seth here to help you level up your fandom, and today, finally, after well over a year and a half, we're talking about Dungeons & Dragons again. Alright guys, this is going to be episode 2, unfortunately, of my campaign diary series. It's been a while, so I'm going to somewhat quickly catch everybody up. I plan on doing maybe 3 episodes to get back to, present day D&D, and that shouldn't be too hard because over the last year and a half, we as a group have taken several hiatuses. People have traveled overseas or hurt themselves or all kinds of stuff, so we've only played maybe another dozen or so times in that year and a half, but the story has continued, and so the diaries will continue. If you don't want to watch the incredibly long video from 2016 where I went over the entire first session of this campaign, I'll still leave a link to the video in the doobly-doo, but in the doobly-doo of that video, there is a super TLDW, so you can read through that and get quickly caught up. If you want to read more of a story format, you can head over to donutsanddragons.com, where I'm currently writing out all of the sessions in fairly great detail. So if this summary doesn't offer up enough detail for you guys for the story, there is ways for you to get a little bit more detail in there. Okay, so where we left off last was the trio were in a tavern in Coram, and just into that tavern had walked somebody very heavy and with quite a lot of authority. All of the lights went dark. It kind of became a really dark, overcast sort of look in the tavern, and the barkeep went pale and stone-faced and mildly terrorized just at the sight of whoever just walked into the bar. So, in this session, that's where we start. And the first thing we learn is that whoever just walked into the bar clearly has a lot of power over this entire city, or possibly more than that, because not only did the barkeep drain of all color and his face went stone, but the people in the tavern all hushed up, quieted down, and you just hear a low rumbling voice from the doorway that the trio can't see because they're in a corner booth and they can't visually see the doorway yet, and all they hear is, "Just give me the coin, Talio," and no response from the barkeep. So, with this lack of response, the trio hears these thud, just heavy booted footfalls start walking into the bar. About halfway through, they see what appears to be a giant stone golem of some kind with glowing blue-green runes and lines all over his body. He slowly steps up to the bar, and Albin decides that he wants to get a little bit closer look or see what's going on, so he wants to move up to the bar to kind of stand by this monstrosity that just walked in and maybe even check in on the barkeep to see how he's doing. So he decides to drunkenly stumble to the bar. That way he could get to the bar without it being ridiculous that he's clearly not paying attention to this stone golem that just walked in. So he gets to the bar, and the barkeep is more or less unresponsive. You hear the giant stone golem, whose name is Gorpus, you guys know that, and they do now, but his name's Gorpus, and he asks again, he says, "Where's the coin, Talio? Just give it to me." And he puts this giant, heavy maw of a hand on the bar and starts to lean on it a little bit, and there's a little bit of creaking in the bar. At this somewhat aggressive gesture, Amifree decides to stand up and start making her way to the bar. But the barkeep is still completely unresponsive. He's paralyzed with fear. So, seeing his lack of response, Gorpus decides to escalate one more time, and he just leans a little bit heavy and just pushes on the bar, and the entire bar just collapses down in this heap of rubble. And instantaneously, all three of the trio have this same thought, and they say it out loud at the gaming table. They say, "Oh shit, we probably shouldn't try and fight this guy." Gorpus, being dissatisfied and a little bit kind of lackadaisically over the entire situation, brushes off his hands and turns to head out the door. And as he's moving towards the door, in file goblins and just, various henchmen of the like, and one giant feathered crow person walks in and goes straight to Gorpus and, kind of whispers at him a little bit, appears to be some kind of status report, and Gorpus leans against the door frame and waits for all the goblins and his henchmen to wreak havoc in this tavern. They start beating up the patrons, they start destroying the place, they're just ransacking the place while Gorpus guards the door so nobody can leave. Understandably, Albin, Amerfrey, and John have a distinct problem with that because they just want to get out of town with their Electrum. Amerfrey looks at the group and kind of whispers like, he said give me the coin. Do you think he's talking about this? And she kind of slips just a hair's breadth of an edge of the Electrum out of her coin purse, and immediately Gorpus turns and focuses right in on her. He can tell that she's got what he's here for. And he kind of slowly saunters over, comes up to the group and is towering over Amerfrey, and as he's looking down he just says, "Give me the coin, child." And Amerfrey did not like being called a child, and she says, "No, not until you tell me why you want it so bad." The group is instantly stunned with this roaring laughter sound, and they realize after a split second that Gorpus is laughing, and his booming laughter is disorienting because it's so powerful. After he slowly calms down from his spurt of laughing, he looks down at Amerfrey and says, "Fine, if that's how it's going to be," and he just raises his hand and knocks her completely unconscious. Just like that. Gorpus turns to leave and let his henchmen clean up after the mess and get all the coin and stuff because he cannot be sullied with such a deed. The crow creature throws up his hood and starts making his way towards Amerfrey, who's laying on the ground now. John jumps out of the booth and puts his hands on her and casts Healing Hands and heals her up for a little bit of HP and brings her back to consciousness. And Albin makes his way away from the bar and puts himself between this hooded crow-like creature and Amerfrey and kind of squares up against this guy in preparation to prevent him from taking the Electrum coin from Amerfrey. Gorpus sees this square off and slowly makes his way back into the bar again and says to the group, "I know you have Electrum, so if you want your lives and you want to save the lives of these fine people," as he gestures wildly to the tavern, "then just hand it over and I'll be on my way." Well, Amerfrey and John reluctantly comply because they want to save everybody, and Amerfrey is still disoriented and really feeling that backhand. So they hand the 2 coins to Gorpus and he turns on his heel and leaves very quickly, leaving his henchmen to finish up all the deeds. Notably, Albin did not hand his Electrum over. He still has that safely tucked away 3 or 4 layers deep in his coin purse. Once Gorpus is gone, the henchmen begin to, take care of the patrons. They start beating them up a little bit, starting to have a little bit of fun before they murder everybody in the tavern. And Amerfrey very quickly decides to cast Sleep, which works great. It works on everybody in the tavern except for the 3 adventurers and the hooded crow-like creature, who, upon seeing everybody pass out, turns back to the group and then makes a beeline for the door and dips out of the tavern. The group decides one thing and one thing only: they need to leave. they decide to head back to the gnome who gave him the electrum and figure out what's up. When they get there, the gnome is freaking out, doesn't know what to say. The group asks him if they built that guy, because he was similar to the stone and wood golem that they dropped down like Iron Man before. The gnome says no, obviously not, but he's basically ruling this town right now, and that's about all the info that they can get out of the guy. The group kind of flounders a little bit and decides to head back down the street, past the tavern, and out of town, presumably to follow the goblins who left the tavern. As they're making their way through the forest, they are just following the trail of the henchmen that vacated the bar. It becomes nighttime, they're in the middle of the forest, so they find a clearing and decide to camp up for the night. As they're making their campsite and fire, they hear this loud rustling and coming from the side, and into the outcropping walks two rather large, wolf-sized giant badgers. And they are just as alarmed to see our adventurers as our adventurers are to see them. So, slight panic ensues, and our adventurers decide to just murder them, I guess. So John comes flying at these two badgers, swinging his two great axes, and, swings away, slaughter, basically kills both of them in a nice solid fail swoop. And as these two badgers are squealing out their dying squeals, into the clearing rushes two even larger badgers. And it's very clear at this point that the two badgers that just showed up are the parents, and the two badgers that John just murdered senselessly were the little baby badgers. So now, there's two giant, angry badgers in the clearing, and they want revenge, or something like that. A short battle ensues. John and Albin both do some melee attacks, get some good hits in. John takes out one of the giant badgers, and Amifree is fighting the one that's still alive. Well, while Amifree is fighting this giant badger, she decides that she's going to cast Fireball, but she is going to shove her hand up this badger's butt and cast Fireball from inside the badger, which is a great idea, I guess, if you're cool with that kind of thing. She rolls really well, does the thing, and while she's this is a little graphic, while she's shoulder deep in this badger, the whole thing kind of explodes, and there's gore all over her, and she kind of freaks out in the super excited, holy crap, did you guys see that? That was ridiculous kind of way. And after they clean off a little bit, they kind of just go to bed for the night. In the morning, they get up and decide to continue following the goblin trail, make their way through some magical stuff, which I won't get into because it's a long, complicated puzzle about a hallway that needs the electrum to open up a little kind of passageway that connects one hallway to a distant stone hallway cave thing on the other side of the Corin Mountains. So they've teleported essentially across the country now through this puzzle, and when they exit, they're near enough to a cave that they can kind of make out some smoke and a heavier trail. This seems to be more or less the cave hideout of these goblins. So they slowly start to sneak up on this cavern and see kind of what the situation is, and they find two guards posted outside the doorway that seems to be the only entrance to the cavern. John and Albin decide to kind of slowly make their way up and peek at the guards. Amifree makes her way, but considerably less quietly, and the guards take notice, but instead of attacking or anything like that, they immediately just retreat into the cavern and don't come back out. The gang learns a valuable lesson here, that enemies can retreat, and they do have a good reason to not just fight all the time. The group slowly makes their way up into the landing just outside the cavern, And what they find is that the entire cavern is completely dark now, which obviously is kind of bad. So the gang slowly starts to make their way inside this cavern. And as they do, instead of giving them a map or uncovering a map or anything like that, I just handed them a sheet of grid paper that I decided to let them draw their own map based on what I tell them. It worked out great. I actually really like this method, and I highly recommend you guys doing this. Just give them a blank sheet of paper and explain the environment to them, and that way not only does it give them a chance to feel like they're really participating, but it kind of gives you a little bit of opportunity to let their imagination take over instead of you dictating the whole scenario all the time, which is fun. It's fun for both sides. So I let them draw their own map, and what they found immediately is a giant hallway that leads straight down, like straight into the cavern from where they are, from the door. And there's an offshoot, like a hallway, just off to the right side, and that's about all that they can tell and see. Both Albin and Amifree have dark vision. John is just a regular old human, so he doesn't have any dark vision, and he's relying on them to kind of help him out with his visual acuity. So Albin decides to go in. He makes a right down this hallway and finds two goblins waiting for him, attacks, and kills them both, and kind of moves a little bit back down the hallway, calls out to Albin and Amifree, and they start making their way inside. What they find, Amifree decides now's a good time to look for traps, and they find right at the intersection of this giant hallway that leads straight in from the door and the little hallway off to the right there's like a big trapdoor plate that covers most of the width of the hallway, and all the way along this giant hallway are little railroad tracks. So presumably they kind of infer that this used to be a mine, or still is a mine, or something like that, and these railroad tracks presumably go deep into an actual mine, and that's why this tunnel is so big, and that's why this cave is even here at all. They continue on the hallway to the right and find a room on the left and a statue at the end of the hallway that looks super awesome. Off to the left of that statue is a doorway that leads into another room. They take the doorway and find themselves in a room full of goblins and a bugbear. They see that this is a bunch of tables and goblins, and there's plates, and pretty quickly infer that this was probably the mess hall or something to that effect. And they're in initiative. They start battling these goblins, and they basically, take all the goblins out fairly easily. Crossbows, magic missile. Amifree's developing quite the affinity for magic missile these days. They take these guys out with one exception. They have a really hard time taking out the bugbear, who is just way more powerful. And it led to one of the funny moments that I'll recap here in this overarching quickly recap thing is they're fighting the bugbear, and Amifree's trying to hit it, and she's rolling, and she rolls a 21 to AC, and it doesn't hit. And she looks to both John and Albin, and she just says, "We should leave." And they all kind of retreat to the back of the room. John and Albin convince her obviously not to leave the fight, but she wants to really bad at this point because they're not convinced that they can do any better unless they possibly hit a natural 20, and that's like, nobody's done that yet in this campaign, so they're iffy about it. Eventually, through some grueling attrition, the bugbear mounts a large assault, and Amifree skirts around the backside of him as he's charging the group, and she casts Charm Person. Nat 20 kills it, and this bugbear is instantly like her best friend and kind of follows her around a little bit, while they explore the dining room and the pantry and kitchens that are kind of all attached to this part of the dungeon, they find the pantry that is mostly empty with just like moldy bread and rats scurrying around, and they find a couple of the doors in this room, and they're getting ready to head out when they have the bright idea to try to keep this bugbear occupied so he's not just following them around for an hour until it wears off, and then he's gonna be really angry. So what they do is they decide to try and convince this bugbear to go into the pantry and make himself a sandwich from this gross moldy bread and a rat. They kill it again with the rolls and handedly persuade their new best friend to go into this pantry and enjoy himself a sandwich for like a long time. And he does. He goes and makes a sandwich, and they all kind of listen with bated breath before they leave the room, and they hear this like sickly crunch, and they book it out of the room very quickly at that point. Next, they find themselves in a large like dining hallway with 6 pillars, and on the pillars are letters. It's another puzzle basically. As they continue to explore, this pillared dining hall has a stairway off to the left that leads really far down into this pit, probably 30 feet down. The stairs are very steep, and at the bottom of this like pit, in the pit, there is a door probably that's covered in runes and all of this stuff, and they can hear kind of like knocking against it from the other side. So Amberfree investigates, and she realizes that these runes are kind of like a magical lock basically, and they all kind of assume that people are being kept inside, and they realize like, oh, these are the people from the tavern. They kidnapped these goblins, kidnapped all the asleep people from the tavern and brought them here and locked them away. So they decide that they're gonna try and figure it out, how to open up this door and get these people out. They go back up to the pillars and realize that the pillars make a sequence, and they can relay what the pillars say and do down to the person in the pit to activate the proper runes, and that will open up the door. So they do eventually, and get this door open, and lo and behold, it's full of all of the townsfolk. So they bring all the townsfolk, including a bunch of kids, into this dining hall and kind of basically tell them to stay here while they explore around some more, and find that the railroad tracks in that main first cavern hallway lead into an actual cavern that presumably is a mine. It goes super far down. They go back to talk to the townsfolk and tell them to stay in this room. They're going to explore a little bit, make sure everybody's taken care of and they're out of danger so that they can lead the townfolk back to town. And they make their way back into the mine shaft and are walking down the mine shaft a little ways, and it gets more and more rocky and less, finished, like us, walls and stuff. It turns into more of a cavern, and at that point they decide like, there's probably nobody down here, and they turn around and make their way back out. Just as they see the beginning outline of the light at the end of the tunnel sort of thing, they are barely making out this little square at the end of the mine shaft that is the light at the end of this tunnel, and as they get a little bit closer they realize that there's somebody standing in this light, and all you see is this dark silhouette backed against the bright light of the rest of the mining corridor. And that's where we're gonna end this recap today. Now, I'm terribly sorry that it's taken us so long to get to this place, and I'm also super sorry that you guys are missing out on so much of the fun and details and just jokes and hilarity that ensues in this campaign as I try to get everybody up to speed. After we get fully caught up to present day, we've got about 2 episodes left. The campaign diaries will start getting a little bit slower and more in-depth and more precise, because they will only be covering 1 session instead of a dozen. So once that happens, a lot more of the humor, a lot more of the storytelling will start making their way back into the videos here. Hopefully you guys liked the video. If you did, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, hit that other button. If you want to see what other hijinks this group gets up to and how the story unfolds as they start making their way into towns and stuff, then hit that subscribe button. You can hit the bell for notifications if you want to get notified every time I upload, every week this year. And with that being said, guys, as I've said before, I hope all of your rolls are 20s. See you guys next week.